Hello, Sangha. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. So good to have you here. Now, before I dive in again to this portion of the opening of the eyes, that is very much concerned, Nichiren is concerned with his students, disciples, what have you, fellow monks, that they understand the nature of the core of Buddhist practice without the impediments of what he would call erroneous views or self-serving views or incomplete views. He has, in his day, a particular bone to pick with Nembutsu and Zen Buddhists. Zen, he actually alludes many times to not actually being Buddhism, and by that means, yes, there's a lot of Buddhist sermons and sutras and commentaries used in Zen, but then there's a deviation from the scholarship of Buddhism when Bodhidharma starts to teach his own elucidations and epiphanies and his own sense of what Buddhism means, and therefore deviates clearly from Buddhism. So to speak of Chan or Zen as Buddhism is actually, to Nichiren, an incorrect interpretation. Zen then is something other than Buddhism, although it is primarily founded on early Buddhist teachings, and this is why it's a problem. It fails to take into account the culminating teachings of the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras, and although future patriarchs of Zen would incorporate those teachings, they did so in a manner as to relegate them as to either inferior or fantastical, not able to practice, or inferior, if you will, teachings, which is really, it's quite a stretch. It's the kind of things people do to justify their actions in anything. Children do this all the time. They know they've done something wrong, but if they can point to somebody else and disparage them, gosh, I can think of a president right now who does that all the time. Take the accomplishments of others and make them look like they were actually damaging, inferior, and demonizing is a popular term today of previous accomplishments in order to bolster one's own thoughts and practices as though they were better. So this is man, right? This is the humankind since the beginning. So Nichiren does a lot of dissecting of this, because what Nichiren does is he uses the actual scholarship of Buddhism to defend his viewpoint. He doesn't just come out and say, okay, this is what Nichiren thinks. Nichiren's constantly making reference to actual quotes from other sutra, Shakyamuni's teachings, and commentaries by very, what would be the word, qualified, very demonstrably correct bodhisattvas like Nagarjuna, Dendai, Dengyo, Miaolo, people who also did as Nichiren is emulating, clearly follow the teachings without derivation. There's enough depth in the teachings, in other words, to answer all questions without having to resort to going to other places to find answers. in fact, going other places is a recipe for misunderstanding. So, with that, I want to say one additional thing, something that you've heard me repeat many times, and I want to make sure it's clear, because as we enter this portion, as I pre-read it again, it may be a bit confusing. I know when I first read it, it was confusing. It seemed to say that what I was doing was just as wrong as what he was pointing out these other people doing. But you have to wait a little bit with Nichiren, because he's so thorough that once he makes one point, you can think you understand what he's saying, and then as he makes several more points in this totality, you begin to get a much clearer picture. And, oh, now I get what he's saying, right? So I can't avoid you making that same error, but I'm just preparing you that if your human mind wants to anchor down one point of thought, try to resist that until you get a bigger picture and you can let these several points intermix, okay? So, the point I wanted to make before I dive into this is, you've heard me say it repeatedly, study, study, study. It's a very critical point of Buddhist practice. But I try, I think, every time I bring that up, to additionally say that once we study, once we get those insights and epiphanies, and sometimes it's hard to get the insight from our study, take that mass of knowledge, that thing you're digesting now, and putting in your brain, your human brain, and take it to Gohonzon, physically sit and chant and recite with that kind of ichinen, that kind of resolve, that kind of determination that these teachings and these new things you've just studied, or things that you've studied before but now have studied anew, and the insights you believe that you're getting from them, align them with the clarity of your Buddha wisdom, your Buddha mind. And how do we do that? We do that by connecting or fusing with Gohonzon, chanting Daimoku. We open that channel so that now that new information which is roiling around in our brain will clarify, will gel into our highest potential of understanding and depth, and thereby affect and influence our daily life as human beings, right? To actualize our awakening, to actualize our enlightenment, which is already here, it's already happening, but we're kind of out of the flow in our human samsaric understanding of the world and the way we see self and other and identification. When we enter our Buddha mind, our clear mind, the me kind of goes away, and we start to see we're in this beautiful flow, the river of enlightenment that we're in. We start to perceive it. It's like there's several videos, and I have it, I think, on my website as well, my fish analogy, the swimming fish. But this video is going to get inordinately long if I go over that again. But very quickly, I'll let you look for it. A mission. Anyway, so my point is, yes, study. But study alone, as I've said many times too, the Buddha warned us, don't get too attached to the words, the sentences, the sutras. The sutras are there as a device to help you gain insight with your mind. So it's about understanding, getting the meaning behind the words, not just the words. That's why when I stress study, I want you to understand it. The study is for the purpose of elucidation, and then to take that physically to Gohonzon with your Daimoku integrates this new knowledge. To know is to experience. To know is also just information. So we need to convert that information into experience. And the experience that we want is an enlightened, awakened Buddha mind experience. So we take this guide of the study and we inculcate it into our minds so that when we chant, we can sort it out, get the meaning, use it as the same way you would use a paint key to open a can of paint up. The key doesn't do the painting, nor does the can of paint. But together, they help us accomplish something, which then, when we're done, we can experience the newly painted space, right? So we're trying to get to that experience. But we need all these other things in order to help us get to that experience. Does that make sense? Analogies are always incomplete, but hopefully that'll help. So now with that, to hopefully prepared your mind a little bit, so this is, maybe you'll get quicker aha moments as I read this, and I'll pause and try to digest some of this stuff. But I think it's more helpful to kind of prepare your mind, our minds, for what we're about to read, so that as I read, things will perhaps become more clear. He says with a question. So here we go. Shakyamuni Buddha, many treasures Buddha, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions came to this world to, quote, make certain the law will long endure, end quote. Honen, Honen and the other Nembutsu priests throughout Japan declare that in the latter day of the law, the Lotus Sutra will disappear before the Nembutsu. Obviously, their superior, chanting Amida Buddha. Are such persons not the enemy of Shakyamuni, many treasures, and the other Buddhas? By the way, Amida is one of the other Buddhas. He's an emanation or a creation, a mental construct of Shakyamuni's. So for them to be following that mental construct rather than the totality of the teachings of Shakyamuni seems a bit quixotic, right? Certainly it does to us today. So what Nichiren is saying is, by doing so, aren't they positing themselves against Shakyamuni? This is what he means, or this translation means, by saying that they are enemies of Shakyamuni, because they're contradicting his teachings with his teachings. Strange, right? So concerning the third group of enemies of the Lotus Sutra, the sutra says, quote, or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement. They will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers, end quote. Now, excuse me, something in my mouth. If you'll recall from earlier videos and your own study, arhats are the highest level of accomplishment of early teachings of Buddhism, right? It's a very intellectual pursuit at that point. Sometimes referred to as the Hinayana teachings, but they're the earlier teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, and they fail to take into account all the latter teachings of Shakyamuni. So they stopped learning, basically, and they stopped at arhat, as though that were the pinnacle of success, right? So this is a reference to that, and without study, you might gloss over that and not really get it, and just ask yourself, what's an arhat? The 6-volume Parinirvana Sutra states, which they would never have read, there are also Ichantikas who resemble arhats, but who commit evil deeds. There are also arhats who resemble Ichantikas, but display merciful hearts. The Ichantikas who look like arhats spend their time slandering the correct and equal sutras to the populace. The arhats who look like Ichantikas, on the other hand, are critical of the voice hearers and go about preaching the correct and equal sutras. They address the populace saying, quote, you and I are all bodhisattvas. Why? Because each living being possesses the Buddha nature. But the populace will probably call such men Ichantikas. So this is where things can get a little confusing. If you don't have enough of a hysteresis or study background on the Hinayana teachings and what he's talking about by an arhat or voice hearers or Ichantikas, you might think, well, that sounds like what we're talking about, right? That we're all bodhisattvas and we're all living and possessing the Buddha nature. But in the context of these earlier teachings, this was incomplete. And so if you don't know that, this is a very confusing statement. And to what degree this statement is a result of the translations into Western idioms, unfortunately, I can't speak to that. I only know from my study, though, that this is confusing because it doesn't relate to the entirety of the teachings and points to a specific interpretation which is incorrect. So again, this is the reason study is important, not so much because every word is accurate, but because in its totality, a clear vision begins to manifest. All right? So the Nirvana Sutra states, quote, "After I have passed away, after the former day of the law has ended, and the middle day of the law has begun, there will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline." Now we know monastic discipline, that's early teaching. There's no such thing anymore, right? But they will I'm not saying there's no such thing in that nobody practices it anymore. There are plenty of sects, groups out there that practice it, but it is no longer part of the more evolved, more complete teachings of Shakyamuni himself. He dropped all of that by the time he got to the later Mahayana sutras, right? But they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras, and instead will crave all the kinds of food and drink to nourish their bodies. Though they wear the clothes of a monk, they will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen, narrowing their eyes, stalking softly. They will be like cats on the prowl for mice, and they will constantly reiterate these words, quote, "I have attained arhatship." Outwardly, they will seem to be wise and good, but within them they will harbor greed and jealousy, and when they are asked to preach the teachings, they will say nothing. Like Brahmins who have taken a vow of silence, they are not true monks, they merely have the appearance of monks, monks, consumed by their erroneous views, they slander the correct teachings. So here we go again. Clothes of monks, narrowing the eye. So they will seek out, because they believe they've reached the pinnacle of Buddhist practice as arhats, they will want to be supported. They will want alms from the people, which was the custom for thousands of years. And in the meantime, and this is the key part, which is what drives me to repeat what I'm always repeating about study, they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras. This is a quick little sentence amidst all of this other, but it's of critical importance, because what does it mean? Study. They won't study. They believe they've reached it, so now they just want money, they want payment for it, they want to be honored as the pinnacle, but they stop studying. So they stop growing. They stop. How many times have I said I've reread these sutras? I reread them before I even talk about them, because there's always some new insight that will come built upon the enlightenment I've already achieved. This is the nature of awakening, wrestling with our human nature, our human mental capacity. We know what we know because it's memory, but we always have to challenge what we know, even with the same information, because we will re-understand it, we will re-see the words, and it will ignite new insights given our experience of life and our experience of what? Chanting and recitation. Because that's the channel that opens our maximum potential, our Buddha mind. Okay, continuing on. Miao writes, concerning people of this type, quote, "The third group is the most formidable of all. This is because the second and third ones are increasingly harder to recognize for what they really are." End quote. And Tung Chung states, quote, "The third part that begins, 'or there will be forest-dwelling monks,' deals with members of the clergy who pretend to be sages and use their positions so that they can act as leaders of all other evil people being people who don't follow the correct teachings." With this, I'm reminded of a lot of contemporary sects that claim leadership and wisdom without You know, to be, I think the definition of a monk becomes clearer as I read this and as I have read this, and has led me to say things that you've heard me say before, that a monk, a true monk, is truly an avid student. So if you never lose that, it's Western words, I'm going to use them, but I hope that you understand in the context that I'm using it in, that I'm not referring to any other kind of ideological thinking, but there's a certain humility, a certain humbleness, that real awakening, real knowledge as experience wells up within a true student, a true practitioner of Buddhism. And that is that, I'll make an interesting comparison here that hopefully you'll relate to. In the martial arts, and they're pretty popular today still, whether you follow MMA or you're a purist, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Israeli, whatever, Russian, French. There's all kinds of martial arts, right? Brazilian. I don't want to make this a martial arts discussion, but there are two things about martial arts in general, as I used to teach them and as I learned from my senseis and sifus. To earn a black belt is to earn the ability to learn. So, to the non-initiated, a black belt is the highest form of martial arts practice. But to a true martial artist, a black belt simply signifies that now you have the basics and you're ready to truly learn martial arts. So that's a very different vision that most of us don't have in regular life, right? The second is this. Even with that knowledge, most would say that martial arts, by its very name, is a warring craft. It is a method of fighting, right? It's a method of war. It's hand-to-hand combat, right? But here is the profound twist on that, is that once a martial artist arrives at a depth of knowledge and understanding of what that particular or many varieties of martial arts are about, what their practice, the meaning of their practice. Forget what it's for, but the act, the conditioning, the dedication, the resolve to become proficient at this martial art. What one learns as one who is proficient is the fragility, the preciousness, the fleeting beauty, and the profound respect of life. And so even if you read popular books like the Bushido Code, you will find that, and I'll quote roughly one of the lines from the Bushido, the most successful samurai is the samurai who's never had to draw his sword. And that is the meaning, is that one becomes so intimate with the fragility, the preciousness of every moment of living experience, that to end it becomes unconscionable, will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid it. So it's kind of It's an odd contradiction, isn't it? But truly it's not. And so the same is true in Buddhism. Is that to be a true monk isn't simply to learn a few passages and walk around teaching them and more to the point, the word position here really drove this home. To then treat yourself as though, well, I know this entire sutra. I understand it. I know what it is. Therefore, cheer me. I'm great. There's no humility in that. To take a position of leadership is to tell others that they're no more capable than being followers. That's a different definition of follower. It's a follower in the sense that you are subordinate, right? But a true monk never thinks that way. A true monk actually is grateful to have anyone hear what they're saying, because for them to hear is for the monk to be offering something of value. And to offer that value enlightens and awakens the path of the monk as well as the other. It's a symbiotic relationship, right? So this is a true monk. A true monk is always seeking, always studying and restudying, always looking for new epiphanies and new ways to see, and sharing, not teaching authoritarianly, but share with others that growth and that path is a cooperative association. That's a monk. That's not only a student. That's a student with aspiration. A student with aspiration that is inclusive of the environment. Because if we learn anything from Buddhism, is that the environment is us. In our human samsaric existence, our environment is very much a projection and a manifestation of our own awakening and enlightenment. So, as for these members of the clergy who act as leaders of all the other people, evil people, it says here, where in Japan, he says, at the present time, should we look for them? On Mount Hei, in Onjonji, in Otsu, in Toji, in Kyoto, in the temples of Nara, in Kenninji, in Kyoto, or Fufukiji and Kenchoji in Kamakura? We must examine this carefully. So he's basically labeling other sects right here, and other teachers more specifically. Do the words refer to the monks of Enrakuji on Mount Hei who wear helmets on their heads and dress in armor? Do they refer to the monks on Onjoji who wear suits of mail on their fivefold bodies of the law and carry weapons? But these men do not resemble the monks, quote, wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement, end quote, that are described in the Sutra, nor do they seem to be the type who are, quote, respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers, end quote. They are not like the men of the third group, who Miao Lo said are, quote, increasingly harder to recognize, end quote. It would appear, therefore, that the words refer to men such as Soichi of Kyoto and Ryokan of Kamakura. Even if they are identified as such, they should not hate others. If they have eyes, they should examine the sutra texts and compare their own behavior with them. Right back to study. Right back to, so he's identifying specific people, and these people are these stray monks, these people who have taken their own positions of avarice and greed to control others and to own others' enlightenment in a way by putting themselves in a position higher than them. What they should do is continue to study. And they would at some point get humble. They would get to the point where they would realize how heinous their self-love is, that their love is not truly love, but their love is enamored with their own intellect and their own arrogance, right? The first volume of Great Concentration and Insight, Tendai again, quote, "There has never been anything to compare to the brightness and serenity of concentration and insight," end quote. The first volume of on Concentration and Insight states, quote, "From the time when Emperor Ming of the Han Dynasty dreamed at night of the Buddha down to the Chen Dynasty when the great teacher Tendai lived, there were many men who participated in the Zen school and received the robe and bowl that were handed down," end quote. The supplement to Tendai's three major works explains this by saying, quote, "The handing down of the robe and bowl refers to the succession of Zen patriarchs from Bodhidharma on down," end quote. The fifth volume of the Great Concentration and Insight states, quote, "There is a type called Zen men, but their masters and disciples are blind to the truth and lame in practice, and both masters and disciples will fall into hell," end quote. So what's hell, as we know? These Western words are thrown into these translations, and they can be very confusing. But to be in hell is to be cut off from your own enlightenment, plain and simple. So if you're not practicing correctly, then you're never going to get to awakening and enlightenment. You're going to be stuck in some inferior realm of your own making, your own arrogance. So that's hell. In Buddhism, if you can't attain your maximum potential, which is available to you in each moment of life, you're denying yourself that very thing. How could that be anything other than hell, right? So this is the language of Buddhism. In the seventh volume, we read, quote, "There are 10 ways necessary for understanding and practicing Buddhism correctly. Of these, except one, the 9 ways have nothing in common with the ordinary priests of the world who concentrate on the written word, nor do they have anything in common with the Zen masters who concentrate on practice being meditation. Some Zen masters give all their attention to meditation alone, but their meditation is shallow and false, totally lacking in the 9 ways. This is no empty assertion. Worthy persons of latter ages who have eyes to see will understand the truth of what I say," end quote. The 7th volume of On Great Concentration and Insight states, quote, "Priests who concentrate on the written word refers to men who gain no inner insight or understanding through meditation, but concern themselves only with characters of the doctrine. Zen masters who concentrate on practice refers to men who do not learn how to attain the truth and the corresponding wisdom, but fix their minds on the mere techniques of breath control. Theirs is the kind of non-Buddhist meditation that fundamentally still retains outflows. Some Zen masters give all their attention to meditation alone means that, for the sake of discussion, Tendai gives them a certain degree of recognition, but from a stricter viewpoint, they lack both insight and understanding. The Zen men in the world today value only meditation as the way to realize the truth and have no familiarity with doctrinal teachings. In relying upon meditation alone, they interpret the sutras in their own way, in other words, to justify their own actions, right? They put together the 8 errors and the 8 winds and talk about the Buddha as being 16 feet in height. They lump together the 5 components and the 3 poisons and call them the 8 errors. They equate the 6 sense organs with the 6 transcendental powers and the 4 elements with the 4 noble truths. To interpret the sutras in such an arbitrary manner is to be guilty of the greatest falsehood. Such nonsense is not even worth discussing. Pretty harsh, right? The 7th volume of the Great Concentration and Insight states, quote, "In the past, the Zen master of Ye and Lo became renowned throughout the length and breadth of China. When he arrived, people gathered around him from all directions like clouds, and when he left for another place, they formed a great crowd along the roads. But what profit did they derive from all this bustle and excitement? All of them regretted what they had done when they were on their deathbed," end quote. In the 7th volume of On Great Concentration and Insight, we read, quote, "The text speaks of the Zen master of Ye and Lo. Ye is in Xingchu and was the capital of the Qi and Wei dynasty. The founder of Zen caused Buddhism to flourish there and converted the people of the region. The great teacher Tendai, out of deference to the people of his time, refrains from naming anyone specifically. Lo refers to the city of Luoyang." The 6th volume Parinirvana Sutra says, quote, "The extreme is impossible to see. That is, the extremely evil deeds done by the Ichantika are all but impossible to perceive," end quote. Or as Miao Lo has said, quote, "The third group is the most formidable of all. This is because the second and third ones are increasingly harder to recognize for what they really are," end quote. "Those without eyes, those with only one eye, and those with distorted vision cannot see these 3 types of enemies of the Lotus Sutra, who have appeared at the beginning of the latter day of the law. But those who have attained a portion of the Buddha eye can see who they are. Quote, they will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders," end quote. And Tung Chun states, "These men will appeal to the government authorities, slandering the law and its practitioners." So, I'm going to take a break there. I hope this is starting to make sense to you. I hope that I'm helping you to understand some of this. I've been practicing a long time, and so I will say this to you. Some of this that seems, even though I try to be thorough, some of this that may seem obvious to me, I may gloss over something that you will teach me by questioning something that maybe I've missed, or maybe you'll see something that you'll go, "Yeah, but tell me again what this means." Don't be shy to ask, please, and use the comment sections in the videos or my Patreon site to message me. I like using the comments on YouTube, only not because I'm a great YouTube fan. There's a lot of problems with Google and YouTube, but a lot of problems with everything these days. But the comment section does provide a forum of sorts that others may see your comment or question and go, "Yeah, I was wondering that same thing," right? Or "I was thinking something along those lines," and maybe you'll inspire them to write a different question. And then they'll be able to see your question and my response, and maybe my response will generate more questions. Maybe it'll answer a lot of people's questions. So please, don't be shy. Many of you have commented, and I thank you so much. Lately, a newer student that I met, John Kelly, has been communicating with me, and he's wonderful. He's doing great things and helping in every way he can. It's not always financial. You help simply by participating. You help by listening. So whoever you are, even if I know that I don't know you, if you're watching this video and you're getting something from it, thank you. Thank you so much. You are the Sangha. We are the Sangha. And with that, I'll say goodbye till the next one. Hopefully it'll be soon. I'm starting to feel a little healthier, so maybe I'll get some more of these done. But I'm determined. There's a lot of Gosho, so that means I'm going to live a long time because I got a lot of Gosho to read yet with you guys. Thank you for being here. Myoho Renge Kyo. Take care of yourselves. Be kind and enjoy every moment of your life. Namo Myoho.